I'm Audrey Wilson, 24 years old, and I always thought family meant unconditional love. That illusion shattered the night of my brother Kyle's graduation dinner. Years of unequal treatment culminated in a moment that broke my heart. Dad proudly gifted Kyle a car for barely passing high school, then turned to me with cold eyes and handed me a rent bill. My 4.0 GPA and full ride scholarship had earned me nothing but higher expectations and less love. That night changed everything. Before I continue with how my life completely changed that night, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Growing up as the older sister to Kyle, who's 6 years younger than me, was like living in two different households under one roof. From an early age, I noticed the difference in how our parents treated us, especially my father, Richard Wilson. Where Kyle's C grades earned him ice cream and praise, my straight A's were met with, "That's what we expect from you." This pattern continued throughout our childhood and teenage years. I graduated high school as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to State University, and maintained a 4.0 GPA while working part-time to cover my expenses. When I graduated college 3 years ago, there was a small dinner at home. My gift was a coffee mug that said, "The real world starts now." Meanwhile, Kyle struggled through high school with C's and D's, barely managing to graduate on time this year. After college, I moved back home temporarily. The plan was to work for a year or two, save money, and then apply to graduate programs in psychology. I secured a job at a local mental health clinic as an intake coordinator, a position that paid decently but not enough to comfortably afford an apartment in our expensive city while saving for graduate school. Living at home was meant to be a strategic stepping stone, not a regression. My father, a successful contractor who built his business from scratch, always had a special bond with Kyle. They shared interests in sports and cars, while I took after my mother's more intellectual side. But even my mother, Laura, a kindergarten teacher, seemed to enable the favoritism rather than challenge it. When I would point out the discrepancies in how we were treated, she would say things like, "Your father shows love differently to different people," or "Kyle needs more encouragement than you do." I tried countless times to address the unfair treatment. Once, after my promotion at work went unacknowledged, while Kyle's first part-time job at the mall warranted a celebratory dinner, I calmly asked my parents if they realized the difference in how they responded to our achievements. "You're comparing apples and oranges, Audrey," my father had said. "You've always been self-sufficient. Kyle needs more support to find his way." My relationship with Kyle himself was complicated. He wasn't malicious about the favoritism. In fact, he seemed largely oblivious to it. He looked up to me, often asking for help with schoolwork or advice about life decisions. I never resented him personally for how our parents treated us differently. If anything, I worried that the constant coddling would leave him unprepared for adulthood. Throughout my early 20s, I held on to hope that things would change once I had proven myself in the professional world. I thought my father might finally see me as the competent, successful adult I had become. Each small achievement at work, each dollar saved toward my future, was mentally cataloged as evidence that would eventually win his approval. The incidents leading up to graduation day painted a clear picture I was trying hard not to see. 3 months ago, when I received a substantial performance bonus at work, I excitedly shared the news at dinner. My father nodded and immediately turned to Kyle to ask about his baseball game. When Kyle got accepted to community college despite his mediocre grades, my parents took him out to a steakhouse and invited the extended family. When I was accepted to all 5 graduate programs I applied to in high school, my mother baked a cake, but my father was too busy to join the celebration. Last Christmas, my father gave Kyle an expensive gaming system to reward his improvement in English class from a D to a C-. My gift was a planner for the upcoming year, with a note that said, "To help you organize your goals." The disparity was so obvious that even my Aunt Meredith raised an eyebrow. "Your father has always struggled to connect with people who don't think like him," Aunt Meredith told me privately. "It's not about love, it's about understanding." But her words, while well-intentioned, didn't lessen the sting of years of emotional neglect. Despite all this, I maintained a close relationship with my family. I contributed to household expenses voluntarily, did more than my share of chores, and made myself available to help Kyle with college applications and scholarship essays. I told myself that family is complicated, that my parents showed love in different ways, and that eventually my father would see me for who I was. Graduation day was when all those carefully constructed rationalizations finally collapsed. Kyle's high school graduation fell on a bright Saturday in June. I had requested the day off work weeks in advance, even though it meant giving up a crucial training opportunity that could have led to another promotion. Family comes first, I told my supervisor, believing it despite the evidence to the contrary. The morning of graduation, I woke up early to help my mother prepare for the celebration dinner planned for that evening. We were expecting grandparents, aunts, uncles, and a few family friends to join us in celebrating Kyle's achievement. I spent 3 hours cleaning the house while my mother prepared her famous pot roast and apple pie. "Your brother is so excited," my mother said as we worked side by side in the kitchen. "He's been talking about nothing else for weeks." "I'm happy for him," I replied, and I meant it. Despite everything, I wanted Kyle to feel special on his big day. I had spent nearly $100, a significant amount from my carefully budgeted salary, on a graduation gift for him, a leather-bound journal with his initials embossed on the cover, and a gift card to his favorite bookstore. Kyle had recently discovered an interest in writing, and I wanted to encourage that spark of academic curiosity. As we prepared the house, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones in their bedroom. "Do you think he suspects anything about the surprise?" my mother asked. "Not a clue," my father replied, his voice warm with excitement. "The look on his face is going to be priceless." I felt a familiar pang in my chest, a mixture of happiness for Kyle and a deep, persistent hurt that my own achievements had never warranted such secrecy and excitement. Just last month, I'd been accepted into a prestigious graduate program with a partial scholarship, and my father's response had been, "Make sure that's a practical career path before you commit." My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Jennifer. "Good luck today. Remember what we talked about. Stand your ground if things get weird. Love you." Jennifer had witnessed firsthand the dynamic in my family and had been encouraging me for years to establish firmer boundaries. I texted back a quick "thanks. I'll try" before returning to my cleaning duties. By early afternoon, it was time to leave for the graduation ceremony. Kyle emerged from his room looking uncharacteristically mature in his cap and gown, though his tie was askew. Without being asked, I stepped forward to straighten it. "Nervous?" I asked him. "A little," he admitted. "Did you feel this way at your graduation?" "Everyone does," I assured him. "Just enjoy the moment. You earned it." And despite knowing that his path had been considerably easier than mine, with much more support along the way, I meant it. Kyle had struggled in his own way, and today was his day. The ceremony itself was standard high school graduation fare speeches from the principal and valedictorian, the calling of names, the turning of tassels. I sat between my mother, who sniffled proudly throughout, and my father, who seemed unusually animated. When Kyle's name was called, my father whooped so loudly that several people turned to look. I clapped enthusiastically, pushing down the memory of my own college graduation when my father had checked his watch repeatedly during the ceremony. "Our boy did it," my father said to no one in particular, his voice thick with emotion. Not everyone believed he could, but we always knew. I bit my tongue against the reminder that Kyle had barely done it, passing his final classes by the slimmest of margins, while I had graduated summa cum laude from a university ranked in the top 50 nationwide. Today wasn't about me, I reminded myself. It never was. After the ceremony, we gathered outside with other families for photos. I volunteered to take most of them, stepping in only when an aunt insisted on one with both Wilson children. As we posed, Kyle's arm around my shoulders, I wondered if anyone else noticed how my father angled his body slightly away from me, how his proud smile dimmed just a fraction when I entered the frame. As we drove home to prepare for the dinner, my mother turned from the front passenger seat to look at me. Audrey, did you see the Johnsons at the ceremony? Their daughter Sarah is going to the same graduate school as you. Isn't that nice? That's great, I said, surprised and touched that she had remembered this detail about my future plans. Maybe you two can carpool, my father interjected. Save on gas money. That program's going to cost a pretty penny. And just like that, my small moment of being seen was transformed into another reminder of how I was viewed a financial calculation rather than a source of pride. Back at home, I helped set the dining room table with our best china and arranged flowers in the centerpiece. Through the window, I could see my father in deep conversation with my uncle, gesturing excitedly toward the garage, which had been kept mysteriously closed all day. The surprise, whatever it was clearly stored there. My stomach tightened with an unexpected feeling of dread. Something about today felt different, like we were approaching a turning point I couldn't yet see. I pushed the feeling away and focused on making the evening special for Kyle. After all, that's what good sisters do. By 7 o'clock, our house was filled with the warm buzz of conversation and the delicious aroma of my mother's cooking. The dining room table had been extended to its full length to accommodate everyone: grandparents, aunts, uncles, a couple of family friends, and Kyle's godparents who had flown in from Arizona specially for the occasion. I wore a navy blue dress I'd bought on sale last month and had taken extra care with my hair and makeup. Part of me, the part that still yearned for my father's approval despite years of evidence that it would never come, hoped that, looking particularly put together, might finally make him see me as the successful adult I'd become. Kyle sat at one end of the table, still in his graduation gown, though he'd removed the cap, beaming as relatives stopped by his chair to congratulate him and press cards into his hand. My mother fluttered around, refilling glasses and bringing out dish after dish. My father stood near Kyle, his hand resting proudly on my brother's shoulder as he recounted Kyle's challenging academic journey to anyone who would listen. Not everyone gets school, he was telling my grandmother, but Kyle here persevered, showed real character pushing through when things got tough. I took small sips of my wine and nodded along with the conversation, offering congratulations where appropriate and deflecting the occasional question about my own life with brief, positive responses. Work is great, thanks for asking. Yes, still planning on graduate school next year. No serious relationship right now, focusing on my career. Dinner was served, and the conversation flowed freely around topics safe from controversy: Kyle's graduation, summer plans, a cousin's recent engagement. I contributed when addressed directly, but otherwise maintained a quiet presence, the role I'd perfected in family gatherings over the years. As dessert was being served, my mother's apple pie with vanilla ice cream, my father stood and tapped his glass with a spoon. The table gradually fell silent as everyone turned to him expectantly. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate a major milestone in our family, my father began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to speaking at job sites. Today, our son graduated high school. A round of applause circled the table. Kyle ducked his head, smiling. Now, some kids breeze through school without breaking a sweat, my father continued, and I felt his eyes flicker briefly to me before returning to Kyle. And then there are the fighters, the ones who have to earn every grade, who have to push themselves beyond what comes naturally. Those are the ones who really learn what they're made of. More nods of approval around the table. My Uncle Henry raised his glass in Kyle's direction. Kyle, my father said, his voice softening with emotion, your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the young man you've become. You've shown determination, character, and heart. You've proven that you can overcome challenges and come out stronger, and that deserves recognition. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, which he placed in front of Kyle. Son, We know you've been saving for a car, working those shifts at the mall, putting away a little each month. It shows responsibility, planning for the future." Kyle nodded, looking slightly confused but pleased at the public acknowledgement. My father smiled, then glanced toward the window that faced our driveway. "But we thought you deserved something special for this achievement, something to help you start the next chapter of your life right." He handed Kyle the small box. With uncertain fingers, Kyle opened it to reveal a key fob, with the BMW logo clearly visible. The table erupted in gasps and exclamations. Kyle's eyes widened in disbelief. "No way," he whispered. My father's smile widened. "Way," he said, using Kyle's own teenage vernacular in a rare moment of playfulness. "It's parked in the garage. Black, just like you wanted." Chairs scraped as everyone rose to follow Kyle and my father to the garage. I remained seated for a moment, a cold weight settling in my stomach. A BMW. For graduating high school with a C average. I thought of my ancient Honda with 200,000 miles on it, which I'd purchased myself with money saved from 3 simultaneous part-time jobs in college. Eventually, I followed the group to the garage, hanging at the back as everyone exclaimed over the shiny new car, a BMW 3 Series that had to have cost at least $40,000. Kyle was sitting in the driver's seat, running his hands over the leather steering wheel with an expression of pure joy. "This is insane," he kept saying. "I can't believe it's mine." I plastered on a smile and waited for the right moment to approach, giving Kyle a side hug when the crowd around the car thinned. "Congratulations," I said, and despite the hurt and confusion swirling inside me, I meant it. Kyle's excitement was genuine and infectious. "You're going to be the coolest kid at community college." "Right?" he agreed, too caught up in the moment to detect any complexity in my tone. "Dad says I can drive us all to Crescent Lake next weekend for Memorial Day." The celebration continued back inside with champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Kyle and our younger cousins. Toasts were made, cake was served, and plans for summer outings in the new car were enthusiastically discussed. Throughout it all, I maintained my smile and supportive sister role, though my cheeks were beginning to ache from the effort. As the evening wound down and relatives began to leave, I started gathering plates and carrying them to the kitchen, falling into the helper role that had always been expected of me. I was loading the dishwasher when my father entered the kitchen, loosening his tie with one hand and carrying an empty champagne glass in the other. "Good party," he said, placing his glass on the counter. "It was," I agreed. "Kyle seems really happy." My father nodded, then leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. His expression shifted to something more businesslike. "Audrey, your mother and I have been talking." Something in his tone made me straighten up, my hand still holding a dessert fork. "You've been living here for almost 2 years now," he continued. "You've got a stable job, you're 24 years old. It's time you started contributing properly to the household." I blinked, confused. I already buy groceries every other week, and I paid for the hot water heater repair last month. My father waved this away as if it were irrelevant. "Starting this month, we'll need $900 for rent, due by Sunday." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I said, "You're joking, right? After you just bought Kyle a $40,000 car for barely graduating?" His expression hardened. "That's different. Kyle's just starting out. You're an adult now, with a job and responsibilities. $900 is below market rate for this area, as you well know." "I'm saving for graduate school," I said, hearing the slight tremor in my voice. "You know that. That's why I moved back home in the first place." "Plans change," he said with a shrug. $900. By Sunday." He turned to leave, then paused. "And don't mention this to Kyle. No need to dampen his big day with adult concerns." As he walked away, leaving me alone among the dirty dishes, something inside me that had been bending for years finally broke. After the last guest left, and Kyle went out to meet friends for a post-graduation celebration, I found my father in his study reviewing blueprints for an upcoming project. My mother was in the living room, flipping through a magazine but clearly not reading it, her eyes darting nervously toward the study door as I knocked and entered without waiting for a response. "We need to talk about what you said earlier," I said, my voice steadier than I expected given the hurricane of emotions inside me. My father looked up, annoyance flashing across his face at the interruption. "There's nothing to discuss. $900 rent, due Sunday. It's more than fair." I took a deep breath. It's not about the amount. It's about the timing and the double standard. You just spent tens of thousands on a luxury car for Kyle as a graduation present. When I graduated both high school and college with honors, I received token gifts and increased expectations. My father leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening into the dismissive look I knew all too well. "You're comparing apples and oranges again, Audrey." Kyle needed the encouragement. "You never did." "So, I'm being punished for being self-sufficient? For not needing constant validation and rewards to achieve basic milestones?" "Don't be dramatic," he said. "You're being treated like the adult you claim to be. Adults pay their way in life." "Then why isn't Kyle being treated like an adult? He's 18 now, old enough to vote, join the military, sign contracts. Why does he get a free ride while I get a bill?" My father stood up, his patience visibly thinning. "Because that's how we've decided to parent each of you, based on your different needs and circumstances." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's because you value him more than me. You always have." The words hung in the air between us, giving voice to the truth that had shaped our family dynamic for as long as I could remember. My father's expression flickered surprise, then anger, then something like cold assessment. "You want to know why Kyle gets different treatment?" he said finally. "Because he's worth it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected for years that my father felt this way, but hearing it stated so baldly, without any attempt to soften the blow or dress it up in rationalizations about different parenting styles, knocked the air from my lungs. "Richard!" My mother appeared in the doorway, her face pale. She must have been listening from the living room. "You don't mean that." "I'm just being honest," my father replied, not taking his eyes off me. "Audrey wants to be treated like an adult. Adults can handle the truth. Kyle has potential if he's given the right support. He could take over the business someday, something Audrey has never shown any interest in." "Because you never offered it to me," I said quietly. My father continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Kyle connects with people, has charisma. He'll go places with the right backing. Audrey's chosen a path that's entirely her own, against our advice. Fine. But that means she's on her own financially too." My mother stepped fully into the room, placing herself between us as if physically blocking the emotional shrapnel flying back and forth. "Richard, stop it. Audrey has always been a wonderful daughter. She's worked so hard, been so responsible. And she's thrown it all away on a dead-end job and plans for a degree that will drown her in debt for what? To listen to strangers' problems all day? What kind of life choice is that?" And there it was, the real issue. Not that I hadn't achieved enough, but that my achievements weren't in directions my father valued. I hadn't followed in his footsteps, or chosen a career path he understood. My independence wasn't a virtue to him. It was a rejection of his authority and values. "My career choice is valid," I said, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. "Mental health counseling helps people. It matters." "So does real work," my father shot back. "Building things, creating jobs, leaving something concrete behind." My mother placed a hand on his arm. "Richard, please. Let's all calm down and discuss this tomorrow when emotions aren't so high." But I was done with the family pattern of avoiding difficult conversations, of smoothing things over until the next incident. "No, Mom. This needs to be said. Dad, I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval. Do you know what it's like to bring home straight A's and have them dismissed as expected? To work multiple jobs through college to avoid asking you for money, only to have Kyle handed everything on a silver platter?" "Kyle has different challenges," my father began, but I cut him off. Yes, he does. And I love him regardless. This isn't about Kyle. It's about you and how you've made me feel invisible in my own family. Tonight was just the final proof that nothing I ever do will be good enough. From outside came the sound of Kyle's friends dropping him off, car doors slamming and voices calling goodnight. The confrontation would have to end soon, one way or another. My father's expression closed like a vault. $900 by Sunday. If that's too difficult for you, perhaps it's time you found your own place to live. The words were delivered with such finality, such dismissal, that something inside me simply gave up. Years of hoping for recognition, of making excuses for the discrepancies in how we were treated, of telling myself that family dynamics were complicated, all of it collapsed under the weight of those few callous sentences. "You're right," I said, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. "It is time." My mother looked alarmed. "Audrey, don't make any hasty decisions. Your father doesn't mean what he's saying. We can talk about this tomorrow." But looking at my father's cold expression, I knew with absolute certainty that he meant exactly what he'd said. And for the first time, I saw with perfect clarity that nothing would ever change unless I changed it myself. "I'm going to bed," I said quietly. "It's been a long day." As I turned to leave, my father called after me, "Remember, $900 by Sunday." I didn't respond. In my heart, I already knew I wouldn't be there on Sunday. Kyle burst through the front door then, still riding the high of his graduation day. "Best day ever," he announced to no one in particular, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. I gave him a quick hug as I passed. "I'm glad, Kyle. You deserve to be happy." And despite everything, I meant it. My issues were with my parents, not with my brother who had simply accepted the role and privileges he'd been offered. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed and felt the physical sensation of my heart breaking, not like the sharp pain I'd imagined, but like something coming untethered, floating free after years of straining against its moorings. There was sadness, yes, but also a strange lightness. For the first time in 24 years, I was seeing my family clearly, without the distorting lens of hope and rationalization. I heard my mother's soft knock at the door but pretended to be asleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, I needed to think. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake, replaying my father's words over and over, because he's worth it. 4 simple words that crystallized a lifetime of feeling second best, of achievements dismissed, of love that seemed conditional on conformity to expectations I could never quite grasp. Around 3 in the morning, I opened my laptop and began taking inventory of my finances. My job paid $45,000 a year before taxes. Decent for an entry-level position, but not extravagant in our high cost of living area. I had managed to save nearly $20,000 toward graduate school by living at home and being frugal with my spending. If I redirected that money, it would be enough for first and last month's rent, security deposit, and basic furnishings for an apartment of my own. I texted Jennifer, not expecting a response until morning but needing to put my thoughts into words. Dad demanded $900 rent starting now. When I questioned why Kyle gets a BMW for graduating while I get a bill, Dad said it's because Kyle is worth it. I think I'm done. To my surprise, Jennifer responded almost immediately. "I'm still awake prepping for a presentation. Holy shit, Audrey, that's beyond messed up. What are you going to do?" "I think I need to move out. Not just eventually. Now. My couch is yours for as long as you need it. No questions asked." The offer brought tears to my eyes. Jennifer and I had been friends since college orientation 5 years ago, and she'd witnessed firsthand the subtle dynamics of my family during visits and events. She'd been gently suggesting for years that my relationship with my parents, particularly my father, wasn't healthy, but had never pushed or judged when I made excuses for their behavior. "Thank you. I might take you up on that while I find a place. Seriously, anytime, starting tonight if you need it." I put my phone down and opened a new browser tab to search for apartments in my price range. The options were limited given the local rental market, but there were several studio apartments within a 30-minute drive of my workplace that might be workable. I bookmarked them to investigate further in the morning. Dawn was breaking by the time I finally drifted into a restless sleep, my mind made up but my heart still aching with the finality of the decision. When my alarm went off at 7, I lay in bed for a few extra minutes, listening to the sounds of my family moving around the house. My mother in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling, Kyle's music playing softly from his room, my father's heavy footsteps down the hallway. For a moment, homesickness hit me preemptively, a longing for the comfort of the familiar, even with all its flaws. But then, I remembered my father's words, the cold dismissal in his eyes, and the feeling passed, replaced by resolve. At breakfast, I maintained a facade of normalcy, discussing weekend plans and responding to questions about work as if nothing had changed. My father made no mention of our conversation from the night before, apparently considering the matter settled. My mother watched me with worried eyes but said nothing of substance. Kyle and I are going to the dealership to finalize the paperwork for his car, my father announced as he finished his coffee. Then we thought we'd take it for a proper test drive up to the lake. Want to join us, Laura? My mother hesitated, glancing at me. What about you, Audrey? Would you like to come? I'm pretty tired from yesterday, I said, forcing a smile. I think I'll just hang around here, maybe catch up on some reading. My father nodded, unsurprised and unperturbed by my absence from the family plan. Kyle looked briefly disappointed, but was too excited about his new car to dwell on it. We'll be back around dinner time, my mother said, squeezing my shoulder as she passed. Maybe we could watch that show you've been telling me about tonight? Sure, Mom, I replied, recognizing her attempt at peacemaking but knowing it was too little, too late. Once they were gone, the house fell into silence. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking around at the space that had been my home for most of my life. The height chart on the wall by the pantry, marking Kyle's and my growth over the years. The refrigerator covered in family photos and Kyle's sports schedules. The small herb garden on the windowsill that I had planted and maintained. There was love in this house, imperfect, unevenly distributed, but real nonetheless. For a brief moment, I wavered, wondering if I was overreacting to one bad day, one hurtful comment. But then I remembered all the small moments that had led to this point. The pattern was clear, and it wouldn't change unless I changed my role within it. With that thought, I headed to my room and began the methodical process of deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Clothes were easy, all of them would come with me, packed efficiently into 2 large suitcases I'd used for college. Books were harder. There were too many to take all at once. So I selected the most meaningful ones and a few I was currently reading. My laptop, important documents, and professional clothes for work were non-negotiable. In my closet, I found a box of childhood mementos, report cards with straight A's and generic good work comments from teachers, medals from academic competitions, the valedictorian medal from high school. I had saved them for years, these tokens of achievements that had gone largely uncelebrated at home. After a moment's hesitation, I left them behind. The past was the past, and I no longer needed physical reminders of my quest for approval. My bedroom slowly transformed as I packed, becoming less personal, more like a generic guest room. It was a physical manifestation of my emotional detachment, and there was something cathartic about the process. Around noon, I called my supervisor at work. Elaine, I hate to do this, but I need to take a few personal days next week. A family situation has come up that requires my immediate attention. Elaine, who had always been supportive of work-life balance, didn't hesitate. Of course, Audrey. Is everything okay? It will be, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. I just need some time to sort things out. Take what you need. Your clients can be rescheduled. That task complete, I continued packing, working quickly but thoroughly. By 3 o'clock, My car was loaded with everything I deemed essential for starting my new life. All that remained was to write the note. I sat at the small desk in my room, pen in hand, staring at the blank paper. What could I possibly say that would make my parents understand my decision, without causing irreparable damage? How could I explain to Kyle, who was innocent in all this, why I had to leave? The first draft was too angry, the second too apologetic. The third rambled without making any clear points. Finally, on the fourth attempt, I found the right words. Words that were honest without being cruel, firm without burning bridges. Dear Mom, Dad, and Kyle, I've decided it's time for me to move out and live independently. Last night made it clear that my place in this family isn't what I thought it was or hoped it could be. Dad, you're right that I'm an adult and should pay my own way. So that's what I'm going to do completely. I won't be paying rent because I won't be living here. I found another place to stay while I look for an apartment. Mom, I know this will upset you, and I'm sorry for that. I love you, but I can't keep pretending that the dynamics in this house aren't hurting me. Kyle, this isn't your fault. I'm proud of you and your accomplishments. Enjoy your car and your graduation. This is between me and our parents, not you. I'll be in touch once I'm settled. Love, Audrey. I read it over twice, then folded it and placed it in an envelope with family written on the front. After a final look around my mostly empty room, I carried the note downstairs and placed it prominently on the refrigerator, secured with a magnet shaped like the Eiffel Tower from my mother's collection. Standing in the entryway, keys in hand, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for what could have been, anger at what was, fear of the unknown, but underneath it all, a growing sense of liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I was making a decision based solely on what I needed, not on what others expected of me. Goodbye, I whispered to the empty house. Then I walked out the door, closing it quietly behind me. The first few days at Jennifer's apartment passed in a blur of practical matters and emotional processing. Jennifer had cleared space in her closet for my clothes, inflated an air mattress in her living room, and stocked the fridge with my favorite comfort foods before I arrived. Her unwavering support was a stark contrast to the conditional acceptance I'd grown up with. Stay as long as you need, she insisted when I expressed concern about imposing. Seriously, it's nice having you here. Like college again, but with better food and fewer all-nighters. My phone began blowing up with notifications the evening I left, around the time my family would have returned home and found my note. Kyle texted first, a series of increasingly panicked messages. Audrey, where are you? Please come home, everyone's freaking out. Did something happen? Mom won't stop crying. At least tell me you're safe. I responded only to the last one. I'm safe. Staying with a friend. Need some space right now. Will explain later. My mother called 14 times that first evening. I let each call go to voicemail, not yet ready to have that conversation. Her messages ranged from tearful pleas to come home to confused questions about what had happened to anger that I would leave without discussing it like an adult. Most revealing were my father's communications. First, a terse text saying, "This is childish and unnecessary." Then, when I didn't respond, a voicemail stating that my theatrical exit wouldn't change the fact that adults have responsibilities. Finally, a formal-sounding email informing me that I had until the end of the month to remove the rest of my belongings, or they would be disposed of appropriately. Not once did he ask if I was okay. Not once did he acknowledge that his words might have contributed to my decision to leave. It was confirmation that I'd made the right choice, however painful. The extended family soon got involved. My Aunt Meredith, my father's sister, called on day 3. "I'm not taking sides," she began, which usually meant she was about to do exactly that. "But your parents are beside themselves. Your mother can barely function." "I'm sorry Mom is hurting," I said, meaning it, "but I couldn't stay in that house anymore." "What happened?" "Richard won't say much, just that you had a disagreement about rent." I hesitated, then decided the truth was the simplest option. Dad bought Kyle a brand new BMW for graduating high school with barely passing grades. The same night, he told me I need to start paying $900 a month in rent, because I'm an adult now. When I pointed out the double standard, he said the difference is that Kyle is worth it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He said that? Those exact words? Yes. Aunt Meredith sighed heavily. Oh, Richard. He always was an idiot with words. Another pause. Look, I'm not excusing what he said. It was cruel and untrue. But you know your father, he's never been good at expressing himself. Especially with you. You're too much like your grandmother, his mother. Smart, independent, questioning. It intimidates him. That's not an excuse for 24 years of making me feel like I'm less valuable than my brother. No, it's not, she agreed, surprising me. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing, getting some distance. Just don't cut them off completely, okay? Your mother is truly devastated, and Kyle is confused and hurt. I'm not cutting anyone off, I assured her. I just need time and space to figure out what kind of relationship I can have with them going forward. After hanging up, I felt a strange sense of validation. Having an outside perspective, a family member at that, acknowledge the problematic dynamic helped combat the self-doubt that had begun creeping in. Was I overreacting? Was I being selfish? Aunt Meredith's reaction suggested not. By the end of the first week, I had established a routine. Work during the day, apartment hunting during lunch breaks and evenings. Jennifer and I would cook dinner together, then watch mindless television shows until I felt tired enough to sleep. On Friday evening, she convinced me to join her for happy hour with some friends from her office. You need to get out of your head for a few hours, she insisted. No family drama, no apartment stress, just overpriced cocktails and people who don't know your life story. She was right. The evening out was refreshing, a reminder that there was a whole world beyond my family troubles. I laughed for what felt like the first time in days, and even exchanged numbers with Jennifer's colleague Mark, who worked in IT and had kind eyes and a dry sense of humor. The apartment search progressed faster than expected. The third place I viewed, a small but well-maintained studio in a converted Victorian house, felt right immediately. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, was a retired teacher who valued quiet, responsible tenants over maximizing profit. When I explained my situation in vague terms, I need to move out on my own quite suddenly, she nodded with unexpected understanding. Sometimes family is the reason we need our own space, she said. The apartment is yours if you want it. You can move in next week. With housing secured, I felt confident enough to finally respond to Kyle's increasingly distressed messages. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between Jennifer's apartment and our parents' house, a neutral territory where we could talk privately. Kyle arrived looking tired and confused, his usual carefree demeanor subdued. He hugged me tightly before sitting down. Are you coming home? He asked immediately. No, I said gently. I've found my own place. I'm moving in next week. His face fell. But why? Is it because of my car? Because I'll give it back if that's what this is about. It's not about the car, Kyle. Not really. I took a deep breath, considering how much to share. He was 18, technically an adult, but still my little brother who I wanted to protect. It's about how Dad and I interact, about patterns that have been there our whole lives. I need space to be my own person, not just Richard Wilson's responsible daughter. But what about me? Kyle asked, his voice small. I'm starting community college in the fall. I was counting on you being there to help me with essays and stuff. I'm not disappearing from your life, I assured him. We can meet up anytime you want. You can still call or text for help with school. I'm just not living under the same roof anymore. Kyle was quiet for a moment, stirring his untouched coffee. Dad's really angry, he finally said. He says you're being selfish and dramatic. What do you think? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. He shrugged. I think something big must have happened that no one's telling me about. One day, everything was fine. We were celebrating my graduation. I got my dream car. The next day, you're gone. And Mom's crying all the time, and Dad's stomping around slamming doors. I hesitated, then decided Kyle deserved some version of the truth. After you went out with your friends on graduation night, Dad told me I needed to start paying $900 a month in rent. When I pointed out that he had just bought you a luxury car for graduating, while I got nothing for my graduations, things got heated. He said some things that made it clear my place in the family isn't what I thought it was. What things? Kyle pressed. It doesn't matter specifically, I said, not wanting to burden him with words that might damage his own relationship with our father. What matters is that I realized I need to establish my independence completely, not just financially, but emotionally too. Kyle processed this, his expression troubled. Are you okay? Like, really okay? The question touched me deeply. In all the messages and calls from family members, Kyle was the first to ask about my well-being, rather than how my absence was affecting everyone else. I'm getting there, I said honestly. It's hard and scary, but also kind of exciting. For the first time, I'm making decisions based solely on what I want and need, not on anyone else's expectations. I can understand that, he said slowly. Sometimes I feel like my whole life has already been decided for me to take over Dad's business, marry someone he approves of, have the 2.5 kids and the house in the suburbs. This was news to me. Is that not what you want? Kyle shrugged again. I don't know what I want yet. That's what college is for, right? Figuring it out? Exactly, I said, smiling at his unexpected wisdom. And that's all I'm doing too, figuring out who I am outside of our family dynamic. We talked for another hour, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, his plans for the summer, my new apartment, a movie we both wanted to see. When we finally said goodbye, hugging in the parking lot, I felt a new connection with my brother, an adult relationship, based on mutual respect rather than the protected dynamic we'd had for so long. 2 weeks after leaving home, I moved into my studio apartment. Jennifer helped, as did 2 colleagues from work who owned a pickup truck. By evening, my meager possessions were arranged in the small space, transforming it from anonymous to personal. Sitting on my secondhand couch that night, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. This was mine, all mine earned through my own efforts, chosen by my own preferences, arranged according to my own taste. The following week, I received an unexpected email from my old professor and mentor, Dr. Hansen. Audrey, I heard through department channels that you've been accepted to the graduate program. Congratulations! I'm leading a research project on trauma-informed care that has funding for a part-time research assistant. The position comes with partial tuition reimbursement. Would you be interested in discussing it? The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The position would not only provide additional income, but would give me valuable experience in my field and help offset the cost of graduate school. After a successful interview, I accepted the position, which would start in conjunction with the fall semester. As summer progressed, I established new routines and boundaries. I spoke with my mother weekly, conversations that were initially tense and tearful but gradually evolved into something resembling normal. She never explicitly acknowledged the favoritism or my father's hurtful words, but there was a new respect in how she treated me, as if my independence had forced her to see me as an adult, in a way living at home had not. My father was a different story. After his initial angry messages, he retreated into stony silence. It was Kyle who informed me that he had forbidden anyone to mention my name at dinner, a childish response that only reinforced my decision to leave. I sent him a formal email with my new address for any mail that might arrive for me, and received a one-word response. Noted. 6 months after moving out, my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. I had started graduate school, excelling in my courses while balancing work and the research position. I had made new friends through classes and professional networking events. I had even gone on several dates with Mark, Jennifer's colleague, though we ultimately decided we worked better as friends. Most importantly, I had developed a new relationship with myself. Without the constant undertow of seeking approval that would never come, I discovered aspects of my personality that had been suppressed. My dry sense of humor, a passion for photography, a preference for spontaneity over rigid planning. I began making decisions based on what brought me joy rather than what would earn validation. One evening in November, as I was preparing dinner in my tiny kitchenette, there was a knock at my door. Assuming it was the downstairs neighbor asking to borrow coffee again, I opened it without checking the peephole. There stood my parents. The sight of my parents standing awkwardly in my doorway sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. My mother looked nervous, clutching her purse with white knuckles. My father stood slightly behind her, his expression a complex mixture of discomfort and something that might have been regret. "May we come in?" my mother asked, after a moment of tense silence. I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Sure, I was just making dinner." They entered cautiously, taking in my small apartment with appraising eyes. I watched my father note the secondhand furniture, the IKEA bookshelves, the lack of a dining table. My mother's gaze lingered on the framed photos on my wall, pictures of me with Jennifer and other friends, at work events, hiking in nearby state parks, a life they knew nothing about. "It's cozy," my mother offered, clearly searching for something positive to say. "It suits me," I replied, turning off the stove where my pasta sauce was simmering. "Would you like something to drink?" "I have water, tea, or wine." "Water is fine," my father said, the first words he'd spoken directly to me in 6 months. I busied myself getting glasses, giving myself time to process their unexpected appearance. When we were all seated, my parents on the couch, me in the single armchair, I asked the obvious question. "Why are you here?" My mother glanced at my father, a look I recognized from childhood, a silent urging for him to take responsibility. To my surprise, he cleared his throat and met my gaze directly. "Your brother is struggling," he said. "He's talking about dropping out of college." Of all the reasons I had imagined for their visit, this wasn't one of them. What? Why? He was so excited about his classes when we had coffee last week. My parents exchanged surprised looks. "You've been seeing Kyle?" my mother asked. "We meet up every couple of weeks," I explained. "He didn't tell you?" My father's jaw tightened. "No, he didn't. Apparently there are a lot of things he doesn't tell us these days." "Richard," my mother said softly, a warning in her tone. She turned to me. "We're worried about him, Audrey. He's withdrawn, his grades are slipping, and yesterday he told us he doesn't see the point in continuing with school when he'll just end up working for his father anyway." I processed this information, trying to reconcile it with the enthusiastic Kyle who had shown me his English essay just days ago, proudly pointing out the A- at the top of the page. "Has something specific happened? Did you two have a fight?" My father shifted uncomfortably. "Not exactly, but ever since you left, things have been different. Kyle questions everything now. Nothing we say or do seems right to him." A realization dawned on me. He's seeing the family dynamic differently because I'm not there to balance it out. My mother nodded slowly. "I think that's part of it. Without you there taking responsibility for everything, we've had to ask more of Kyle. And she hesitated, glancing at my father. "He's not responding well to pressure," my father finished, a note of bewilderment in his voice. "Everything I ask of him becomes an argument. If I offer advice, he says I'm controlling. If I give him space, he says I don't care." Under different circumstances, I might have found some satisfaction in my father's struggle to parent the child he had always favored. But seeing the genuine concern on both their faces, I felt only sadness for my brother's difficulties. "What do you want from me?" I asked directly. "We thought maybe you could talk to him," my mother said. "He respects you. He might listen if you encouraged him to stick with school." I considered this. I'm happy to talk to Kyle, but I won't pressure him or tell him what to do. If he's questioning his path, That's his right. He needs to figure out what he wants, not what you want for him. My father's face reddened slightly, but he nodded. That's fair. An uncomfortable silence fell. There were so many unspoken issues between us, so much history that couldn't be addressed in one conversation. Finally, my mother spoke again. We've missed you, Audrey. The house isn't the same without you. I've missed aspects of home too, I admitted. But I needed this. I gestured around my apartment. I needed to know I could stand on my own. You've always been able to stand on your own, my father said quietly. That was never in question. For you, maybe. For me, it was something I had to prove to myself. My father looked down at his hands, then back up at me with an expression I'd rarely seen on his face: uncertainty. I said things that night, things I shouldn't have said. It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Richard Wilson, it was the closest thing to one I'd ever received. I waited, allowing the silence to stretch, giving him space to continue if he chose to. Your mother has pointed out that I've been uneven in how I treat you and Kyle. That's one way of putting it, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Audrey, my mother warned. No, she's right, my father said, surprising us both. I've expected more from you and given you less recognition. It wasn't fair. I felt a lump forming in my throat but swallowed it down. No, it wasn't. I don't know how to fix it, he admitted, but I'd like to try. For Kyle's sake, if nothing else. The qualification stung, but I recognized it as my father's attempt to save face. A lifetime of emotional stubbornness couldn't be overcome in one conversation. The fact that he was here at all, admitting any fault, was significant. I won't move back home, I said firmly. But I'm open to rebuilding our relationship. Slowly, and with boundaries. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. That's all we're asking for. As they prepared to leave, my father paused at the door. You've done well for yourself here, he said, his tone gruff but sincere. It's not what I would have chosen for you, but it suits you. Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment, processing the unexpected visit and what it might mean for our family's future. The conversation hadn't resolved all our issues, far from it, but it had opened a door that I thought had been permanently closed. The following weekend, I met Kyle at our usual coffee shop. He seemed surprised when I brought up his struggles at school. Mom and Dad came to see you? He asked, clearly shocked. They're worried about you, I said, and honestly, so am I. You seemed fine when we talked last week. Kyle sighed, running a hand through his hair. I am fine, mostly. I don't know if community college is right for me right now. And every time I try to talk to Dad about other options, he shuts me down. What other options are you considering? I've been thinking about taking a gap year, maybe traveling a bit, working different jobs to figure out what I actually enjoy. He looked at me anxiously. That's not crazy, right? Not at all, I assured him. Lots of people take time to explore before committing to a career path. Try telling Dad that. He's got my whole life planned out, take business classes, work summers at his company, eventually take over when he retires. But what if that's not what I want? I smiled at him with newfound respect. My little brother was growing up, questioning the path that had been laid out for him just as I had done. Kyle, the most important thing I've learned in the past 6 months is that you have to live your life for yourself, not for Mom and Dad or anyone else. That doesn't mean being selfish or irresponsible, but it does mean making choices based on your own values and interests. How did you get so brave? He asked. Just packing up and leaving like that? It wasn't bravery so much as necessity, I admitted. I had reached a point where staying would have cost me more than leaving, emotionally speaking. Kyle nodded thoughtfully. I think I'm reaching that point too. Not about living at home, I'm okay with that for now, but about following Dad's plan without question. Then, you need to have an honest conversation with him. Be respectful, but firm about what you want. Will you help me? Be there when I talk to him? The request touched me deeply. Of course. But remember, this is your life and your decision. I can support you, but I won't fight your battles for you. Over the next few months, our family began a slow, sometimes awkward process of rebuilding relationships on new terms. Kyle did have his conversation with our father, with me present as moral support. To everyone's surprise, after the initial resistance, my father eventually agreed to a compromise. Kyle would complete his first year of community college, then take a year to explore other interests before deciding whether to continue with business studies. My relationship with my mother improved the most quickly. Without my father's overwhelming presence shaping our interactions, we discovered common interests and a similar sense of humor. We began meeting for lunch every other week, conversations that ranged from casual catching up to deeper discussions about family dynamics and her own experiences as a young woman. I should have stood up for you more, she admitted during one such lunch. I knew Richard favored Kyle, but I told myself it was because you were so self-sufficient that you didn't need the same kind of support. Why did you stay with him? I asked, a question I'd wondered about for years. You must have seen how he treated you sometimes. Not just me. She considered this thoughtfully. I loved him. Still do, despite his flaws. And there were good times too, moments you probably didn't see. Plus, divorce wasn't something women of my generation did lightly. She smiled sadly. But if I'm being completely honest, part of it was fear of starting over alone. You're braver than I ever was, Audrey. My relationship with my father remained the most complicated. Old patterns don't disappear overnight, and he struggled to relate to me as an independent adult, rather than the dutiful daughter he had expected me to remain. But there were small changes. He made an effort to ask about my graduate studies, sent an awkwardly formal email congratulating me when I was published as a co-author on Dr. Hansen's research paper, and stopped making dismissive comments about my career choice. A year after I had left home, I hosted a small dinner party in my apartment, which I had recently upgraded to a one-bedroom in the same building. My parents and Kyle were among the guests, along with Jennifer, my Aunt Meredith, and a few close friends from work and school. Watching my father engage in polite conversation with my professor about the practical applications of psychological research, seeing my mother help serve dessert in my tiny kitchen, observing Kyle deep in conversation with my friend Marcus about travel opportunities abroad, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected to achieve so soon. The power dynamic in our family had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the overlooked daughter seeking validation, but an independent adult choosing to include my family and my life on my own terms. My father was no longer the unquestioned authority whose approval determined my worth, but simply one relationship among many in my rich and fulfilling life. As I built my career in mental health counseling, I found that my personal experiences gave me unique insight into family dynamics and the courage it takes to break unhealthy patterns. My relationship with Nathan, a kind and supportive fellow graduate student I had been dating for several months, showed me what equal partnership looks like, a stark contrast to the imbalanced relationships I had witnessed growing up. Kyle eventually decided that business was indeed his path, but on his terms he wanted to focus on sustainable entrepreneurship rather than construction. After initial resistance, my father grudgingly supported this direction, perhaps having learned from his experience with me that holding too tightly to control often results in losing connection altogether. The journey wasn't always smooth. There were still difficult conversations, moments of reverting to old patterns, times when boundaries needed to be reasserted. But with each interaction, each holiday navigated, each disagreement resolved respectfully, we built a new kind of family relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than prescribed roles. Looking back on that pivotal night when my father had demanded rent, while gifting my brother a luxury car, I realized that what had seemed like the worst moment of my life had actually been the catalyst for necessary change. Without that breaking point, I might have continued indefinitely in the role of the good daughter, seeking approval that would never fully come, sacrificing my own needs to maintain a false family harmony. The most profound lesson I learned through it all was that true self-worth comes not from external validation from parents or anyone else, but from honoring your own values and boundaries. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and ultimately for your relationships is to walk away from situations that diminish you, even when those situations involve the people who are supposed to love you most. As I helped Kyle move into his own apartment near campus the following year, a modest place he was paying for primarily himself through a part-time job and scholarships, he thanked me for showing him it was possible to forge his own path. "If you hadn't left that night, I don't think I ever would have questioned anything," he said as we assembled a bookshelf together. "You changed everything, not just for yourself, but for all of us." His words stayed with me, a reminder that our actions can have ripple effects beyond what we initially imagine. By choosing myself in that moment of crisis, I had not only changed my own life, but had created space for others to change as well. Sometimes, walking away isn't an ending, but the first step toward building something better, something true, something healthy, something that can genuinely last. And sometimes the note you leave behind opens the door to conversations that should have happened years ago. Have you ever had to walk away from a situation to preserve your self-respect? What difficult family dynamics have you navigated in your own life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's sometimes the most necessary act of self-preservation.